The alarms on my bridge screamed before I even understood what they meant. Every sensor array across my fleet locked onto a single target, a human vessel the size of a small moon, broadcasting on every military channel we could intercept. My name is Veskor, Fleet Commander of the Thorathi Dominion, and on that day I believed I was about to win the easiest war of my career. We had crossed hundreds of light years to reach this system. Our scouts had studied the species called humans for 3 cycles before the invasion began. Their weapons were primitive by our standards. Their ships moved slowly. Their communications leaked information so carelessly that our analysts joked about it during briefings. When we finally received the order to advance on their home system, nobody on my crew expected a real fight. The vessel ahead of us called itself the Ares. It was massive, yes, but size alone does not win battles. My sensor officer, a sharp young operator named Thry, reported that its shields were already flickering before we fired a single shot. I remember feeling something close to disappointment. I had trained for decades to command fleets against enemies who understood war. This felt like stepping on an insect. I gave the order to advance in formation, spreading my cruisers wide to surround the Ares from 3 angles. Standard doctrine. Overwhelming force against an isolated target. The humans on board must have known what was coming, because their ship began broadcasting a message on an open frequency. A voice calm and steady. A woman named Grace Whitfield identifying herself as the commanding officer. She did not beg. She did not threaten. She simply stated her name, her rank, and the registry number of her vessel, as if she were filing a report, rather than facing annihilation. I remember thinking it was a strange kind of dignity, the sort you find in creatures who already know they have lost. The battle itself lasted less than 20 of their minutes. The Ares fired back, of course. A few volleys of what our engineers later identified as low-yield plasma cannons, nothing that could pierce our hull plating. We absorbed the hits without slowing our advance. My tactical officer, a veteran named Skarn who had served with me since the Vren campaign, requested permission to fire the killing volley. I gave it without hesitation. The Ares broke apart in a silence that should have felt satisfying. Instead, something about it bothered me. The explosion was too clean, too controlled. When a vessel that large is destroyed, the reactor core should scatter energy in every direction. A chaotic burst that damages nearby ships and lights up sensors for 100,000 kilometers. This one folded in on itself instead, almost gently, like a flower closing at night. I did not mention this feeling to my crew. Commanders are not supposed to hesitate after a clean victory, and my officers were already celebrating. Skarn opened a bottle of fermented Vren spirits he had been saving for exactly this moment. Thry laughed with the relief of a young officer who had survived her first real engagement. I allowed myself half a smile and told them they had done well. But I could not stop looking at the readings. Later that night, alone in my private quarters, I pulled up the full sensor log from the battle and ran it back frame by frame. The reactor signature the Ares displayed during combat did not match the emissions from its final explosion. A ship producing that much destructive output should have shown far higher energy readings in the minutes before it died. Instead, the numbers barely climbed. It was as if the vessel had been holding back, or worse, as if it had never been running at full power in the first place. I called Thry to my quarters and showed her the discrepancy. She studied it for a long moment, her antennae twitching the way they always did when she was thinking hard. "Commander," she said, "this could simply be measurement error. Human technology is crude. Their instruments might not calibrate the same way ours do." I wanted to believe her. It would have been easier to believe her. But something in my training, some old instinct sharpened over decades of war against species who understood deception, told me this was not a mistake in measurement. This was a mistake in assumption. I ordered a full diagnostic sweep of the debris field before we moved further into the system. Skarn objected, arguing that we were wasting time we did not have, that Dominion Command expected rapid progress toward the home planet. I overruled him. It was the first time in years I had gone against the momentum of my own fleet, and I remember the silence on the bridge when I gave the order. A silence that told me my officers thought their commander was becoming cautious in his old age. The diagnostic teams found something strange within hours. Fragments of the Ares hull contained material that did not match standard human shipbuilding alloys. Some pieces were dense enough to be structural armor, built for genuine combat. Others were hollow, lightweight, almost decorative, designed to look impressive on sensors without providing any real protection. It was as if two different ships had been welded together and sent out as one. I stood on the observation deck that night, watching the debris drift silently against the stars, and I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not fear exactly. Something closer to the feeling you get walking into a room you were told was empty, and hearing a floorboard creak somewhere behind you. I did not share my full suspicion with the fleet. What would I have said? That the ship we just destroyed might have been built to be destroyed? That the humans who had failed to stop us so easily might have wanted it that way? It sounded absurd even inside my own head. No species sacrifices its flagship on purpose. No commander sends their best officers to die for a trick. And yet Grace Whitfield's voice kept returning to me. The calm in it. The steadiness. Creatures facing certain death do not usually sound so composed, unless they already know something their enemy does not. I gave the order to proceed toward Earth, but I also gave a second, quieter order. I told Thry to keep a permanent watch on gravitational anomalies across the entire system, especially anything near the planet's dark side. I told Skarn to reduce our approach speed by a small margin, enough to give us more reaction time without alerting anyone above me to my growing unease. Skarn thought I was being paranoid. He said it directly to my face, which I respected him for, even as I disagreed with him. He reminded me that we had studied this species for cycles, that their technology was decades behind ours, in every measurable category, that their fleet numbers were a fraction of what Dominion intelligence considered a credible threat. He was not wrong about any of those facts. I simply could not shake the feeling that facts were not the whole picture. That night, I reviewed everything Dominion intelligence had gathered on human military doctrine. Most of it painted a picture of a young, aggressive, disorganized species, prone to public displays of strength and weakness in equal measure. Their news channels broadcast military parades. Their leaders gave speeches about defending their homeworld. On the surface, it looked exactly like a civilization that had nothing left to hide, because it had already shown us everything. But there was one detail buried in an old intelligence report that I had read years ago, and dismissed as irrelevant. Human military history was full of stories about deception. Wars won not through greater strength, but through misdirection, through hiding true numbers, through letting an enemy believe they had already won before the real battle even began. I had read those reports the way you read old myths, interesting stories about a species too young and chaotic to matter. Now those stories felt less like myths and more like warnings I had chosen to ignore. I closed the file and sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the quiet hum of my ship's engines. Somewhere ahead of us, Earth was waiting, small and blue and supposedly defenseless. I had won every battle I had ever fought by trusting the evidence in front of me. For the first time in my career, I found myself wondering if the evidence had been placed there on purpose, arranged like pieces on a board, by someone who understood exactly how I would think, and exactly what I would choose to believe. I gave the order to hold formation at the edge of the system, and wait for full sensor confirmation before advancing further. Command would not be pleased with the delay. I did not care. Something about that gentle, folding explosion still sat wrong in my chest, and 20 cycles of war had taught me that the feeling in your chest is sometimes the only warning you get before everything changes. 3 days passed before Dominion Command sent a message demanding to know why my fleet had stopped at the edge of the system instead of pressing toward Earth. I answered honestly, which was a mistake I would later regret less than I expected to. I told them I suspected the destruction of the Ares was not what it appeared to be, and that I wanted full confirmation of enemy strength before committing the fleet to a full advance. The response came back sharp and dismissive. High Marshal Orvec, a commander whose reputation had been built on speed rather than caution, reminded me that hesitation had cost the Dominion entire campaigns in the past. He ordered me to resume advance within one cycle, or face review for command fitness. I read his message twice, then set it aside, and continued my work, because whatever fear I felt about my career mattered less than the fear building quietly in my chest about what waited for us near that planet. Thry had not slept properly in 2 days. I found her at her station, running the same gravitational scans over and over, adjusting filters, cross-referencing data against every known form of natural interference. When I asked her what she had found, she hesitated before answering, the way officers do when they are not certain their commander wants to hear the truth. There are readings near the planet's dark side that do not match anything natural, she said. Mass concentrations that appear and disappear, depending on the angle of our approach. At first I thought it was sensor ghosting from lunar debris, the kind of interference we sometimes see near rocky moons. But ghosting does not move in patterns. These readings shift position in ways that suggest something is actively avoiding our scans. I asked her to show me the data directly, and she pulled up a visual model of Earth rotating slowly on my console. Small clusters of unexplained mass appeared scattered across the planet's night side, clustering most heavily in the region, permanently shielded from our current angle of approach. As Earth rotated, some clusters would vanish from view entirely, only for new ones to appear elsewhere, always staying just out of direct sensor contact. It's using the planet as cover, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Thry nodded slowly. That is my working theory, Commander. Whatever these masses are, they seem to know exactly where our scanners are weakest, and they are positioning themselves accordingly. That kind of precision requires either extraordinary luck or detailed knowledge of our sensor capabilities. I did not like either possibility. Luck was not something I trusted in warfare, and the idea that humans possessed detailed knowledge of Dominion sensor technology raised questions I did not want to answer yet. I ordered Thry to keep the observation quiet, shared only among a small circle of officers I trusted completely. With word spread through the fleet that our sensors might be compromised or outmatched, morale would suffer at exactly the moment we needed confidence most. Skarn joined us later that day, still skeptical, though less openly hostile than before. He had seen the data himself and could not explain it away as easily as he wanted to. Still, he argued that unexplained readings did not necessarily mean hidden warships. Perhaps human infrastructure simply produced strange gravitational signatures we had not accounted for. Perhaps their planet itself had unusual geological properties. I wanted to believe him. Truly, I did. It would have been so much simpler to continue the advance, secure a quick victory, and return home with my reputation intact. But I kept thinking about Grace Whitfield's voice, calm and unafraid in the final minutes before her ship was destroyed. I kept thinking about the reactor signature that did not match the explosion. I kept thinking about the strange mixture of heavy armor and hollow decoration we had found scattered across the wreckage of the Ares. None of these things proved anything on their own. Together they formed a pattern I could not ignore, no matter how much High Marshal WarHFY wanted me to. I requested a full historical review of human military conflicts, hoping to find some pattern in how this species fought when they believed themselves outmatched. Our archive on human history was incomplete, assembled hastily during our initial reconnaissance phase, but it contained enough to trouble me deeply. Story after story described smaller human forces defeating larger ones through misdirection, false retreats, decoys designed to draw an enemy into overconfidence, before revealing hidden strength at the worst possible moment. One particular record caught my attention, an ancient conflict where a smaller human force had disguised empty vehicles as powerful weapons to frighten a much larger army into retreating without a fight. Another described a naval battle where a fleet allowed itself to appear scattered and weak, drawing the enemy into a trap that closed only once they were fully committed. These were old stories, centuries old by human reckoning, but the pattern felt disturbingly familiar to what I was seeing now. I began to suspect that Earth's visible defenses, the modest fleet numbers, the outdated-looking technology broadcast openly for any observer to study, were never meant to represent the true strength of this species. They were meant to be seen, they were meant to be believed. And somewhere in that planet's shadow, something far more dangerous was waiting for exactly the moment when belief turned into overconfidence. I brought my concerns to a small council of trusted officers that evening, deliberately excluding anyone likely to report directly back to High Marshal WarHFY. Thry presented her sensor anomalies. I presented the wreckage analysis and the historical patterns. Even Skarn, still unconvinced that we faced anything beyond ordinary human stubbornness, admitted that the timing of these discoveries was troubling enough to warrant additional caution. We are not fighting the fleet we can see, I told them. I believe we are fighting a species that has spent generations learning how to make itself look weaker than it truly is. If that is true, then everything we have observed since entering this system, the outdated ships, the leaked communications, the destruction of the Ares itself, may have been designed entirely for our benefit, not to defeat us in that moment, but to convince us we had already won. The room was silent after I finished speaking. Nobody wanted to believe it, myself included. Believing it meant admitting that an enemy we had dismissed as primitive might understand deception on a level our own doctrine had never fully prepared us for. It meant questioning every piece of intelligence we had gathered since arriving in this system, and wondering how much of it had been placed there deliberately, waiting for us to find it and draw exactly the wrong conclusion. High Marshal Orvek's second warning arrived the following morning, this one carrying an explicit threat of removal from command if I did not resume advance immediately. I understood the political reality behind his impatience. Dominion Command wanted a quick, clean victory to report back to the wider council, proof that our expansion into this region of space continued unopposed. A cautious commander who delayed conquest over unconfirmed sensor anomalies did not fit the narrative they wanted to tell. I made my decision that morning, one I knew might end my career regardless of what happened next. I would advance the fleet as ordered, but not blindly. I restructured our formation to keep our most heavily armored vessels at the front, with support ships held back at a distance that would allow rapid retreat if necessary. I ordered Thry to maintain continuous scanning of Earth's shadow throughout our approach, with instructions to report any change in the anomalous readings immediately, regardless of hour or protocol. Skarn, to his credit, did not argue against these precautions even though he still doubted my full theory. He respected caution born from experience, even when he disagreed with the reasoning behind it. Together, we briefed the fleet on a modified approach pattern, careful to frame it as standard tactical prudence, rather than open fear of a hidden threat we could not yet prove existed. As we began our final approach toward Earth, I found myself standing on the observation deck once more, watching the blue planet grow larger against the black of space. It looked peaceful from this distance, beautiful even, wrapped in white clouds and reflecting sunlight across vast oceans. It was difficult to imagine anything dangerous hiding within its shadow, and yet every instinct sharpened by decades of warfare told me that peaceful appearances were exactly what this enemy wanted us to see. Thry's voice broke the silence over the ship's comm system, tight with barely controlled tension. "Commander," she said, "we are entering optimal bombardment range. All primary targeting systems report Earth's surface defenses as minimal, consistent with prior intelligence estimates." I looked at the planet for a long moment before responding. Something in her voice told me she felt exactly what I felt, the sense that we were walking into a room that had been arranged to look empty by someone who wanted us to feel safe enough to stop looking for the door. "Understood," I said finally. "Prepare for advance, but keep every scanner active. If something changes, I want to know before it happens, not after." The fleet moved forward into the range that would begin the bombardment, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet, certain voice told me that whatever we found on the other side of this moment would change everything I believed about the nature of this war. The order to begin bombardment came through official channels less than an hour after we entered range, and I gave it because I had no legitimate reason left to refuse. Our long-range scans of Earth's surface showed minimal military presence, a handful of orbital platforms that our analysts classified as outdated defense stations. Nothing capable of mounting a serious resistance against a fleet of our size. Every instrument we possessed told us this would be easy. Every instinct I had built over 20 cycles of war told me the instruments were lying. I gave the order anyway. A commander who refuses direct orders based on feeling alone does not remain a commander for long, and I still held a small hope that my caution had simply made me see danger where none existed. Skarn coordinated the opening barrage, our forward cruisers unleashing focused energy strikes toward what our sensors identified as key population centers and military installations across the northern hemisphere of the planet. For the first few seconds, nothing happened that I did not expect. Our strikes connected. Explosions bloomed silently against the blue and white surface below us, visible even from orbit as bright flashes swallowed by distance. Thry reported minimal defensive fire in return, a scattering of surface-to-orbit weapons that our shields absorbed without difficulty. Skarn allowed himself a rare smile, turning to me with something close to vindication in his expression. "You see, Commander," he said, "perhaps this time your instincts were wrong." I did not answer him, because in that exact moment, every sensor on my bridge began screaming at once. Thry's voice cut through the sudden chaos, sharper and louder than I had ever heard it. "Commander, mass signature detected rising from the planet's shadow, bearing 047, distance closing rapidly. It's massive, sir. Nothing in our database matches this profile. I turned toward the main view screen, just in time to watch something impossible happen. A shape began emerging from the darkened edge of Earth, not from orbit, not from any position our scans had covered, but from the planet's own shadow, as if it had been resting there, hidden behind the curve of the world itself, shielded from every angle our sensors could reach. It rose slowly at first, then with terrifying speed, a vessel so large it made the Ares look like a training craft by comparison. Every gun on my bridge crew fell silent. I understood in that instant, with the sudden clarity that comes only in moments of true fear, that everything we had seen since arriving in this system had been exactly what Thry and I suspected. A performance, a carefully constructed lie designed to lead us to precisely this position, at precisely this range, with our fleet fully committed and unable to retreat before the truth revealed itself. "Identify that vessel," I ordered, my voice steadier than I felt. Thry's hands moved rapidly across her console, though I could see them trembling slightly. "Human military channels are calling it multiple names, sir. Some transmissions refer to it as contingency. Others use the designation last argument. I believe these may be operational code names rather than an official registry." Before I could respond, the vessel opened fire. I have commanded fleets, through dozens of engagements across my career, faced enemies who understood energy weapons, enemies who understood kinetic bombardment, enemies who understood the chaos and fury of open warfare. I had never witnessed anything like what that ship unleashed in its opening volley. There was no wasted energy, no scattered fire meant to overwhelm through sheer volume. Every shot moved with surgical precision, striking specific systems across our forward cruisers with an accuracy that suggested the humans had studied our ship designs far more thoroughly than we had ever studied theirs. 3 of my cruisers lost primary power within seconds, their shields collapsing not from overwhelming force, but from precisely targeted strikes against known vulnerability points in Dominion hull design. I watched on my tactical display as ship after ship reported critical damage, not destruction exactly, but disabling strikes that left them drifting, defenseless, completely removed from the battle without ever truly dying. "They are not trying to destroy our fleet," Skarn said quietly beside me, his earlier confidence completely gone. "They are trying to dismantle it." I understood immediately what he meant. A commander seeking pure destruction, fires to kill, to eliminate as many enemy vessels as quickly as possible regardless of cost. This vessel fired with a different purpose entirely, removing ships from the fight, one precise strike at a time, conserving its own resources, while methodically stripping away our combat capability. It was the strategy of an enemy who had already calculated exactly how much force was required, and refused to waste a single unnecessary shot. I gave the order to return fire with everything we had, knowing even as I spoke that we were now reacting rather than commanding the battle. Our remaining cruisers unleashed their full arsenal toward the emerging vessel, a wall of energy and kinetic force that should have staggered any ship in existence. The strikes connected, illuminating the darkness around the human vessel in brilliant flashes, and for one brief moment I allowed myself to hope we had found a weakness. The hope died as quickly as it appeared. Thry's voice returned, quieter now, almost disbelieving. "Shields holding at 93%, Commander. Minimal structural damage detected." I stared at the display in front of me, watching numbers that should not have been possible. A vessel that size should not have been able to withstand a full fleet volley with barely a scratch, and yet here it was, absorbing our best efforts as though we had thrown pebbles at a mountain. I understood then, with a certainty that settled cold and heavy in my chest, that we had walked into a trap decades in the making, and no amount of firepower we currently possessed would be enough to escape it cleanly. The human vessel continued its methodical assault, and around it, additional threats began revealing themselves. What we had assumed were harmless debris fields scattered throughout the system suddenly activated, revealing themselves as small, fast-moving drone swarms that darted between our disabled cruisers, targeting weapon systems and communication arrays with the same surgical precision as their larger counterpart. Orbital platforms we had dismissed as outdated defense stations opened fire from angles our sensors had failed to properly map, adding their strength to the growing chaos surrounding my fleet. "Everything is a weapon," Thry said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything we thought was harmless, everything we dismissed as primitive or outdated, it was all part of this. I did not have time to fully process the scale of what we were facing, because at that moment, my communication officer reported an incoming transmission on an open frequency, directed specifically at my flagship. I ordered it received, uncertain what to expect, my mind already racing through possibilities that ranged from surrender demands to outright destruction. The voice that came through was calm, measured, almost gentle in its delivery. A man identified himself as Daniel Ford, speaking with the quiet authority of someone who held every advantage in the conversation and felt no need to raise his voice to prove it. "Commander Vesas Kaor," he said, and hearing my name spoken by a human voice sent an unexpected chill through me. "I want you to understand something before this continues. Everything you have seen since entering our system was designed for this exact moment. Your fleet is currently within the effective range of every weapon system we have deployed across this planet and its surrounding space. You have already lost this engagement. What happens next is entirely your choice." I sat frozen for a moment, unsure how to respond to an enemy who spoke with such certainty in the middle of active combat. Around me, my bridge crew waited in tense silence, watching for my reaction, waiting to see how their commander would answer a voice that carried the weight of absolute victory. "What do you want?" I finally asked, keeping my own voice as steady as I could manage. "I want you to withdraw what remains of your fleet," Ford answered without hesitation. "We have no interest in destroying every ship you brought here. We have already demonstrated what we are capable of. Continuing this fight will only result in further losses on your side, losses that serve no purpose beyond proving a point you have already understood." I looked around my bridge at the wreckage displayed across every screen, at cruisers drifting powerless, at drone swarms still picking apart our remaining defenses with terrible efficiency. Skarn caught my eye, his expression a mixture of disbelief and something close to fear, an emotion I had never seen on his face in all our years serving together. "I am not authorized to order a full withdrawal without confirmation from Dominion Command," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I understood how hollow they sounded given our current situation. Ford's response carried no anger, no frustration, only patient certainty. "Then I suggest you contact your command quickly, Commander. My officers are prepared to continue this engagement for as long as necessary, but I would rather not cause additional losses that serve no strategic purpose. You have seen what we can do when we choose to reveal it. I would encourage you to consider what remains hidden, and whether you truly wish to discover it." The transmission ended, leaving silence heavy across my bridge. I stared at the tactical display, watching the human vessel continue its slow, deliberate advance through the wreckage of my fleet, disabling ship after ship with a precision that felt less like warfare and more like a demonstration, a lesson being taught to a student who had badly underestimated the material before the exam even began. I thought of Grace Whitfield's calm voice before the Ares was destroyed. I thought of the reactor signature that never matched the explosion. I thought of every warning sign I had noticed, and every instinct I had chosen to trust against the growing pressure from command, to move faster, to conquer quicker, to treat this species the way we had treated every other civilization that stood in the path of Dominion expansion. We had been wrong about humanity from the very beginning, and now that wrongness was being carved into the wreckage of my fleet, one precise and merciless strike at a time. I gave the order to disengage before High Marshal Orvek could countermand it through official channels, a decision that would likely end my career regardless of how the rest of this battle unfolded. Every remaining ship under my command received instructions to withdraw toward the system's edge, moving in the tightest defensive formation we could manage given the extent of our damage. It felt less like a tactical retreat and more like fleeing a predator that had already decided it was finished playing. The human vessel did not pursue us with the aggression I expected. Instead, it continued its methodical work, disabling the last of our stranded cruisers with the same unhurried precision it had shown from the opening moments of the engagement. Drone swarms peeled away from destroyed hulks, only after confirming there was no further threat, moving with an efficiency that felt almost surgical in its restraint. They were not trying to annihilate us. They were making certain we understood exactly how thoroughly we had been outmatched, then allowing us to leave and carry that understanding home. Skarn stood beside me on the bridge, watching the wreckage of our fleet fall away behind us as we retreated toward open space. He had not spoken since Ford's transmission ended, and when he finally did, his voice carried none of the confidence I had grown used to over our years serving together. "I did not believe you," he said quietly. "When you first raised concerns about the Ares, I thought you were seeing danger in shadows that did not exist. I am sorry, Commander. I should have listened sooner. There was nothing to forgive in that moment, not truly. Every piece of intelligence we possessed had pointed toward an easy victory, and questioning that intelligence required a kind of stubbornness that felt closer to recklessness than wisdom, until the moment it proved correct. I told him as much, though the words felt hollow, given how many lives had already been lost by the time my suspicions were finally validated. Thry remained at her station, running continuous scans of the retreating human vessel until it faded from our sensor range entirely, swallowed once more by the shadow of the planet it had emerged from. She reported that the vessel made no attempt to pursue us beyond the immediate battle zone, content instead to watch our fleet withdraw without further engagement. It was, in its own way, a message as clear as anything Daniel Ford had spoken aloud. They had won completely, and they knew it, and they felt no need to prove anything further. We limped back toward Dominion space over the following weeks, our surviving vessels barely holding together, our crews shaken in ways that went beyond simple physical injury. I filed my official report honestly, describing everything we had witnessed, every piece of evidence that had led me to delay our advance, and everything that happened once we finally committed to the attack Dominion Command had demanded. The response from High Marshal Orvek arrived weeks later, colder and more clinical than I expected, given the scale of our losses. I was relieved of active field command pending a full review, a decision I accepted without protest. There was little point arguing against consequences that felt almost gentle compared to what we had already experienced at the hands of an enemy we had underestimated so completely. During the review process, I was given access to updated Dominion intelligence reports, compiled in the aftermath of our engagement. Analysts had spent months reconstructing what actually happened at Earth, piecing together fragments of data from surviving sensor logs and the testimony of surviving crew members across the fleet. What they discovered painted a picture far more unsettling than anything I had personally witnessed during the battle itself. The Ares had indeed been a deliberate sacrifice, constructed specifically to be destroyed in a manner that would appear convincing without revealing any true information about human military capability. Its reactor signature had been artificially generated to produce a controlled, contained explosion, rather than the chaotic energy release a genuine destruction would create. Every piece of that ship had been engineered to deceive rather than to fight, a performance staged for our benefit from the very first moment we entered the system. The vessel that emerged from Earth's shadow, the one human channels referred to as Last Argument, represented something Dominion intelligence had never encountered before. Its true capabilities remained largely unknown even after months of analysis, because the humans had revealed only the minimum force necessary to convince us of their strength without exposing the full extent of what they possessed. Analysts speculated that even the devastating display we witnessed represented a fraction of the technology and firepower this species had developed while hiding behind a carefully maintained image of primitive weakness. I read through report after report during my months of confinement to administrative duty, each one adding new layers to a picture that grew more troubling with every detail. Human history, once dismissed by Dominion scholars as chaotic and unremarkable, was re-examined with fresh eyes and found to contain pattern after pattern of exactly the behavior we had witnessed at Earth. Entire conflicts throughout their history had been shaped by deception, by deliberate displays of weakness designed to lure overconfident enemies into fatal mistakes, by patient strategy that valued long-term advantage over immediate satisfaction. I thought often about Daniel Ford's voice during those months, calm and certain even in the middle of active combat, offering us a chance to withdraw not out of mercy exactly, but out of a kind of confidence so complete it did not require cruelty to prove itself. I thought about Grace Whitfield, whose final transmission, before the destruction of the Ares, had sounded less like a woman facing death and more like an actress, delivering a final line before the curtain fell on a performance she had rehearsed countless times. 6 months after the battle, Dominion High Command issued a revised threat assessment for the species designated as humanity. I was granted access to the document during the final stage of my review, partly as a courtesy given my role in exposing the true nature of what we had faced, and partly, I suspect, because someone in command wanted me to understand exactly how significant my initial caution had been, even if it had come too late to prevent the losses we suffered. The old assessment had described humanity as primitive, disorganized, and militarily insignificant, a species whose expansion posed no meaningful threat to Dominion interests in the region. The new assessment contained a single line that replaced every previous conclusion, a line that would define Dominion policy toward Earth for generations to come. It stated simply that engagement with this species should not be attempted again without overwhelming strategic justification, and that further contact should proceed with extreme caution until additional intelligence could be gathered through means other than direct confrontation. I sat with that document for a long time after reading it, alone in the small administrative office I had been assigned during my review, staring out a viewport at the distant stars beyond. Somewhere out there, impossibly far away now, a small blue planet continued spinning quietly through its shadow, hiding whatever remained of its true strength behind an image of vulnerability it had spent generations perfecting. I thought about what Daniel Ford had said during that final transmission, about how continuing the fight would only prove a point we had already understood. I realized, sitting there in the quiet aftermath of everything that had happened, that this had never truly been about winning a single battle against the Dominion fleet. Humans had not fought that day simply to survive our attack, though survival had certainly been part of their goal. They had fought to ensure that no one, not the Dominion, not any other species watching from a distance, would ever again make the mistake of viewing their world as an easy target. They had built an entire strategy around patience, around restraint, around the willingness to appear weak for as long as necessary, until the moment weakness could be revealed as its opposite. It was a kind of warfare I had never encountered in 20 cycles of Dominion military service, one built not on overwhelming force applied quickly, but on overwhelming force held in reserve until the exact instant it would matter most. My formal review concluded with a decision that surprised many of my former colleagues. Rather than removing me from service entirely, Dominion Command reassigned me to a newly formed intelligence division dedicated specifically to studying human behavior and strategy in greater depth. It seemed my instincts, however late they had proven in preventing disaster, were now considered valuable enough to preserve rather than discard. I accepted the assignment without hesitation. Somewhere out there, humanity continued building whatever came next, patient as always, content to let the rest of the galaxy believe whatever story served their purposes best. I intended to spend the remainder of my career trying to understand a species that had taught the Dominion, in the span of a single devastating battle, that appearances could never again be trusted at face value. I still think about that final transmission sometimes, Daniel Ford's calm voice offering us a chance to leave with whatever dignity remained to us. I think about Grace Whitfield's steady tone before her ship was destroyed, and Thry's growing certainty as she uncovered anomaly after anomaly that everyone else wanted to dismiss. Most of all, I think about the moment that massive vessel rose silently from Earth's shadow, revealing in an instant that everything we believed about this small, unremarkable-looking planet had been carefully, deliberately, and completely wrong. Humanity had not shown us their true strength that day because they wanted to win a single battle. They had shown it to us so thoroughly, so decisively, that no one would ever again dare to test them the same way. And in the quiet months that followed, reviewing report after report of a species we had once considered beneath our notice, I finally understood the lesson they had intended for us to carry home. Some enemies do not need to announce their power. They simply wait, patient and hidden, until the moment their silence speaks louder than any warning ever could.